All right, Max, we got another one. This is After the Rain. Um, Really cool book. A little interesting just as a backstory. So, this is actually a comic book adaptation of a short story written originally by this person at the top. I think it's like Nnedi Okorafor. And I'm probably gonna butcher some names in here, so apologies ahead. And then so this was the person that wrote the original short story. It's a really cool Nigerian kind of folk tale of sorts. And then the people that made the graphic novel adaptation were John Jennings, who did the writing, and then it was illustrated by David Brame or Brame. I'm again not exactly sure, but let's jump right in. Um, so here's our overall scores. Again, I don't want to ruin the whole story here, but this is it's a fun short story based in Nigeria. You get a character who's on the front, Chioma, and she is visiting some family in Nigeria, and she ends up getting sucked into kind of a strange, mysterious tale. She meets an odd boy near the beginning of the graphic novel that then has kind of like a cursed effect on her. Some bits and pieces here to give you a sense of kind of the look and feel of this graphic novel. And so you kind of get the sense really early on in this story that you're watching this kind of like Grimm's fairy tale fable thing play out. This character meets again this kind of boy at the beginning, and then her family recognizes there's some things from the spirit world that this is going to be kicking off, and the whole story is her sort of dealing with this roller coaster ride that the older people around her know that she's going to be on. And so I won't tell you all the pieces of it, but it's kind of her riding the ride here of dealing with this sort of supernatural world. In terms of characters, I think that in a good way, it's like the fable ends up trumping a little bit of the personal elements. You get bits and pieces of the main character, which are nice, but I think that probably the characters themselves didn't like stand out to me as like incredibly memorable. It was more the adventure that they went on, primarily the main character as well. So I gave it more of a middle 5. In terms of the art, I just loved I think that was probably my highlight of this book. Something about the colors are so vibrant, and I think that there's a consistency to the look and feel of everything throughout. You probably noticed on some of the pages, there's again this like tapestry of I think iconography and visuals that would be like very much within the Nigerian culture, and it just gives this beautiful aesthetic that I really like. Lots of these masks, the general creatures you run into. I'm not trying to again spoil like some of my favorite things, but this right here, this image right here of this one particular like monster, I just like loved. Like a lot of these things are blends of various types of physical materials like cement or fire, and it just comes out so cool. And so anyway, I was a huge fan of the art. I love the color. Some of the scenes are like deliberately, I think, kind of like they're meant to be a little scary or a little bit muddled. I think that they don't shy away from like gore or blood either, but it all just really works together in a way I just really liked. So I gave this an 8 out of 10 for the art. In terms of the history and culture, I gave it a 6. Obviously, it's a little bit hard because you're dealing with a folklore type story, but I think that you got to get a lot of but I think I guess through this and people have written as reviews about this thing or the book as well, that like the story gives you a sense of some like a flavor of like a Nigerian type story, like a Nigerian type folklore. You get to see lots of things like homes that people would live in, some like the types of wildlife that would be there. I think there's some great scenes of like little details like the marketplaces they would shop for groceries, like the even little details like you know, not as common in America to haggle, but you see over here, there's like, I think some like haggling about prices that one of her family members is doing. So I think like, because the culmination of all these things, the fact you get some really nice depictions of native wildlife, native food, the marketplace cultures, the housing, the colors, some of the interactions with the people. I thought that it gave you, again, not a perfect sense, but you're reading a book. It's never going to be like traveling there in real life, but it gave you a little bit of that tourism that I know I've talked about before with like Helena Filipina, that you might at least feel like you got to know a little bit of this part of the world better for reading this comic. So I think, again, it's a strongish showing, and I think even though it's not someone's personal story because it's coming from a fictional short story, the short story itself has elements that feel still very tied to the culture, similar to like a Shubak Lubek, which was a previous video I had, based out of Egypt. Even though it was a fantasy story in a fantasy world, it was very, I think, still Egyptian. In terms of readability, I've showed a bunch of pages at this point, so hopefully I've shown some of the really nice art. And it's not too dense. Like it's not overly wordy. It's also not overly long. It's just over 100 some pages, 125 or so. So you could bang this whole thing out relatively quickly. Definitely, this is a single sitting type book. I lowered the score a little bit just because almost every book I review here so far I've read at least twice for some consistency, and to get a sense of how easy it was to get through again. This book for me was like an interesting one because I think actually once I appreciated the art more, it made it easier to read. I think the first time I was reading it, if anything, I think maybe one of the I don't want to say negative exactly, but some of the gorier scenes are at the very beginning of this book, and I think that did throw me off a little bit on my first read, where I got stumped a little at the beginning, just thinking this whole book is going to be like this, and then I think a lot more of the beautiful art really emerged later. And so knowing that, reading the second time, I think I did read it essentially all in like one sitting and found it more readable that way. But maybe for a new reader, it could be a little tiny bit off-putting at the beginning. In terms of the X factor, like what am I going to remember about this book that's unique? I had to think about this one for a while. I think that it was hard to score the X factor here because on the one hand, I think it's actually novel for this type of a graphic novel to be adapting a short story from a different medium and making it into a really compelling graphic novel. I've read a couple graphic novel adaptations of classic books like How to Kill a Mockingbird or 1984. There's some of these classic novels that have been turned into, or Brave New World, turned into graphic novels. So I just hadn't seen that in the more cultural perspective. So I thought that was kind of unique. And I liked the fact that, again, there's this fable running through it that feels very true to the area, but at the same time, I guess because they also were taking from source material, it's hard to give it like a super high X factor because they weren't completely coming up with a totally new concept. They were using something that's already been written. So it was hard to rate this one, but I think overall I was more persuaded that it's unique, at least more than average, a lot of these graphic novels, and so I gave it a 6 overall. And then this ended up giving it a exact 6.0 as the overall total. So definitely suggest After the Rain, really cool book if you pick it up. And that'll be it for this one.